Hello everyone, this is Dr. Lashik. In this part of Chapter 1, we're going to talk about the difference between applied and basic research, how scientists dig deeper, how scientists make it public, and then the difference between journal articles and journalism. Alright, so let's start off by talking about the difference between applied and basic research. Applied research is research done or designed to fix a practical problem. For example, doing research on the best teaching practices in a classroom or doing research on a specific therapy would both be examples of applied research because they're done with a goal in mind to fix some issue that we experience. Basic research is just simply research to add to the knowledge pool. And oftentimes this basic research is then later used to enhance applied research later. For example, examples of basic research might be studying the memory capacity of children or the rape myths that are believed by college students. Translational research is the marriage of the two, so basic and applied research. This is where we use the results of our basic research studies to design research for applied problems. For example, after we do all the research, basic research on memory capacity in children, we have a better understanding of the memory capacity of children. So we can translate that information to test different teaching models that complement our new knowledge about memory capacity for children. So let's talk about the picture on the current slide. This is another example of the marriage between basic and applied research. In basic research, again, it's just adding to the knowledge pool. Here on the left side, they show a picture of such a study. They wanted to see what it would take to convince or trick the brain that this rubber hand, which is in the middle there, is actually her own hand, even though, of course, that's not true. So that research done on the rubber hand was then translated to an applied research study and to better able design prosthetic arms for people. So how can we take the lessons we've learned from the rubber hand study and apply it to creating better prosthetics? So scientists dig deeper, and this means that they are rarely satisfied after the completion of only one study on a particular topic. And that's because once research is done, it raises a lot more questions. So the more research you do on a topic, the more questions you have about that topic. For instance, with my dissertation, I noticed that there was a problem. There were only surveys about sexual assertiveness designed for college-aged women, so I decided for my dissertation that I would make one for women of all ages. Future possible questions arose after I completed that study. For example, how is the concept of sexual assertiveness different between women of different ages? Another question that came up was more translational in nature. So given what we know now about sexual assertiveness research based on my previous studies of basic research, how could we then give sexual assertiveness training to women of all ages, not just college women? And so as you can see, you basically are asking more and more questions as you go. Another expectation of researchers is to make their work public. It wouldn't be very advantageous for anybody if a researcher did a bunch of research and then kept it to themselves. It has to be made public to some degree. That way other researchers who are doing research in the same field can take that information and build upon their own findings and actually increase the knowledge pool on that topic. And the way that scientists do this is they submit their work to a journal. And these journals are unique in that they are peer-reviewed, which means that peers in the field review that work and decide if it is qualified to be a part of that journal. And this is different from almost every other journal out there. It is very heavily micromanaged and heavily filtered so that poor research does not accidentally get into the mix. What happens is, if you have a manuscript that you would like to submit for this journal, it would be sent to an editor. The editor would read your work and then choose a group of peer reviewers who are considered experts in that field that you are writing about. They then review it, and then as a team, they decide whether or not to reject or accept your work. This peer reviewing process is anonymous. It could be the neighbor who works across the hall from you, but you would never know. And it is meant to be that way so that everybody gives their honest opinions about the quality of the work that they are given. It is designed to keep the integrity of the field. It is so well filtered that there is very low chance that poor research will accidentally seep through the cracks. However, still, flaws sometimes are left in these journal articles after publishing. And so what's nice about the system is that even after it's been published and it's out there in the literature and people are reading it, the readers can then also serve as post peer reviewers, and that as they read, if they find a huge error that was missed by the peer reviewers and the editor, they can actually write in or call the journal and let them know that the error is still there and that it needs to be changed, and it will be a change will be made. So editors actually make the final decision on what is published. So after the peer reviewers all talk about why it needs to be rejected or accepted, they give the editor their recommendation, and then the editor makes the final decision. And 3 outcomes are possible. You could either be rejected outright, saying, no, we do not want this. They could reject but ask for a revise and resubmit. So they say there's a lot of hopefulness to this study. Please just revise this in the ways that we recommend, and we would be happy to review it. Or they accept it outright, which is a very rare occurrence. Usually there's at least some ways that a study can be improved. Now let's talk about the big differences between journal and journalism. So journals are what we just talked about on the previous slide. They are peer-reviewed places to publish scientific work that are very highly filtered and scrutinized. Journalism, on the other hand, is where we get most of our information. So that's from the internet, magazines, newspapers, the media. That's all journalism. Typically, and unfortunately, only people in the field read the journal articles related to their field. So if you're in psychology, you're probably going to be exposed to a lot of primary peer-reviewed journals. However, no one else would even try to look up that information. They would get that same information from journalism sources like the internet, magazines, or newspapers. The big difference, like I said on the previous slide, is that journalism is not peer-reviewed. Usually, if science is published in journalism, it is the interpretation of the science from the journalist, meaning that the journalist may not have a science background on that topic and may accidentally print misleading or false information. Have you heard of the Mozart effect? This is a great example of when journalism accidentally misinterprets scientific research. The Mozart effect is the idea that if you expose babies and toddlers to Mozart music or classical music, they will become smarter when they grow up. What really happened was that a scientist did an authentic scientific study on the idea of Mozart and helping with spatial reasoning tasks. So a spatial reasoning task is a sort of puzzle. And what they did is they had Mozart music playing in the background while one group of people did the spatial reasoning task and another group did not have the music while they did the same task. And what they found was that there was a brief, small improvement in ability to complete the task when Mozart was playing. That's all they said, and that was their conclusion for their research. Yet, when the media heard about this, they misinterpreted their findings and instead told everybody on the planet that if we just exposed our babies to more Mozart and classical music, they would become smarter. When really all the researchers, scientists was saying was that if you exposed them to Mozart, they would be better at completing specifically a spatial reasoning task and only negligibly better and only for a very brief period of time. So it doesn't actually increase intelligence. Here's a great example of how journalism can sometimes misinterpret scientific findings. And this is a great comic called PhD Comics, and it's online. Here we start off at the top of the little circle here, and it says you're a researcher, you're doing your research, and you come to the conclusion that A is probably correlated with B. So A is correlated with B. Your university then gets the word out to let everyone know that one of our students has found that A is correlated with B. But then the newspaper hears about this and writes a piece on it. And instead of saying A is correlated to B, it says A causes B. And then the internet gets a hold of this information from the news source and it spreads pretty quickly. And then the news gets a hold of that and it spreads pretty quickly. And it starts to get even more sensationalized. Now the news is saying A causes B all of the time. And then it gets all the way up to your grandma, and you have a conversation with your grandma about the research you just finished conducting at your university. And she says, well, since A causes B all the time, I'm trying to ward off A. And you put your hand over your face because you're exasperated. And this is the kind of thing, I know this is a funny example, but this is the kind of thing that happens all the time. And so we do have to be very, very, very careful about how we interpret journalism information and be very critical of it and try to find the original source information to interpret it for yourself. But that being said, we also have to be critical of the science, so of the primary sources, and that's a little bit harder to do because we're now contending then with other researchers who hopefully have been through a research methods class like you are going through now and have all of those things in mind. So usually it's safe to assume that it's in pretty good shape, but we should still be critical of all of the information we receive, but especially journalism. If you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to email me.